So normally, this is the second time we've done this Pathways service, but there's not necessarily a formal sermon, but I wanted to share some reflections on where we are at this point right now, and then we'll take a break and then come back and enter into Musaf. I've been thinking about this week. I have had so many meetings and coffees and conversations, and on Zoom and in person, the clergy has been meeting with numerous people throughout the week. Some this week went the way they wanted, and the majority in Bethel, it went differently than they anticipated. There's a lot of different ways of connecting dots in the world. And the election is certainly a dot, and it certainly put us, it was not something that was expected, not just by us, but the media, however it gets its polling, certainly was surprised by the week as well. Another point of the week is a news story that I saw. It was prompted by MCPS sending out a notice of a random text that went through MCPS. To MCPS enough that they had to address it. It was also throughout many of the Virginia school systems as well, and the Virginia Attorney General had to come out with a statement about this that I feel a sense of alarm as well. Here is the second dot, the first dot being the election. The second dot is the day after the election. This text went widely throughout, and this one was by a member of Channel 13 News down in Virginia, whose name is Sam Burwell. He received this text: "Greetings, Samuel. You have been selected to pick cotton at the nearest plantation. Be ready at 12 p.m. sharp with your belongings. Our executive slaves will come get you in a brown van. Be prepared to be searched down once you've entered the plantation. You are in Plantation Group W." And Burwell writes in this news report that he knows that many others received that message. I do as well. It was widely circulated enough, as I said, that MCPS had to send out a warning this week. Was that your work? No. That one of an MCPS employee is here who I was referencing. And then, of course, the third dot in this doom cycle is Amsterdam, right, where people are describing it as a pogrom. Supporters of the Israel soccer team were brutally attacked. That the coincidence that today is the anniversary of Kristallnacht has not been lost on me. 86 years since Kristallnacht, and this week about a dozen people the beating was so brutal that about a dozen people went to the hospital. It has been described in different reports of just being that the police were completely at bay and that it was chaos. A sense of how extreme it is simply that the Rabbanut of Israel allowed El Al to fly on Shabbat to bring Israelis out of Amsterdam and the region. They probably don't do that very often. So we can easily connect the dots in a doom cycle that the world is falling, that the sky is falling. And while it certainly feels that maybe the sky is a little bit closer than it was last week, it is not falling. Because I believe also in a virtue cycle as well. I believe that when we do something good, that there is also equally a cycle of good that comes out. In 2020, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote this book called Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. So I recommend this. I recommend everything that Rabbi Sachs has written. And he writes this. He writes, a free society is a moral achievement. Over the past 50 years in the West, this truth has been forgotten, ignored, or denied. That is why today liberal democracy is at risk. Societal freedom cannot be sustained by market economics and liberal democratic politics alone. It needs a third element, morality, a concern for the welfare of others, an active commitment to justice and compassion, a willingness to ask not just what is good for me, but what is good for all of us together. He writes, it is about us, not me, about we, not I. If we focus on the I and lose the we, if we act on self-interest without a commitment to the common good, if we focus on self-esteem and lose our care for others, we will lose much else. Nations will cease to have societies and instead have identity groups. We will lose our feeling of collective responsibility and find in its place a culture of competitive victimhood. It's an interesting phrase, competitive victimhood. In an age of unprecedented possibilities, people will feel vulnerable and alone. The market will be merciless. Politics will be divisive, politics will be deceiving, divisive, confrontational, and extreme. People will feel anxious, uncertain, fearful, aggressive, unstable, unrooted, and unloved. They will focus on promoting themselves instead of the one thing that will give them lasting happiness, making life better for others. People will be, by historic standards, financially rich, but emotionally poor. Freedom itself will be at risk from the far right and from the far left. The far right dreaming of a golden age that never was, the far left dreaming of a utopia that will never be. Liberal democracy is at risk in Britain, Europe, and the United States. So is everything that these democracies represent in terms of freedom, dignity, compassion, and rights. Rabbi Sachs was on to something in 2020. He wrote this in response to the years earlier than 2020. And our virtue cycle is because we know what to do. Doing good is not new to us as Jews. I also think doing good is not new to us as Americans. We know how to do good. In Isaiah, it says, true worship is the work for justice and care for the poor and oppressed. That's the work of Isaiah. That is our work that we know how to do. Our partnerships at Bethel with local organizations for hunger or immigration or the needy is not post-election decisions. These are deep relationships, and we will dig into them more. In Proverbs, it says, speak out in defense of the poor. And we will. Because this is what we do as Jews, not in reaction to one administration or another administration. We do this because it is part of the Jewish soul. And if we need to do it with more intensity because an administration has changed, then we will do it with more intensity. But I will repeat to you that we do this because this is the right thing to do, not because Bethel will become an outpost of the DNC or political allegiances. We will not become a political outpost. We will be a safe space for all, and a safe space where we are guided by the morals and the foundations and the values that are deeply held by us as Jews. And of course, in Leviticus, to love your neighbor as yourself. If anything, one of the things that we learned from the election is that maybe we don't know our neighbors as well as we think we do. Right? Because there were 71 million people that thought that President Trump would be the right choice. And I know firmly that there are not 71 million haters in America. People made their choices because there was a hook that they found most important, and they found a way to excuse all the other character flaws, moral shortcomings, to vote the way that they did. So we need to listen more, right? But I do not believe that there are 71 million people that voted for Trump because he was a hater. They found other reasons too, but of course there were 71 million people who decided that they could excuse those things and invited hate to the center. That may have not been their intent, but is the outcome. So we will have to reclaim, redouble down on our Jewish values. And the way that we will do that is that we're going to act locally. Because whereas we read press reports from all around the country, we don't actually have influence on that grand scheme. Again, when we look at the grand picture, it feels like a doom cycle, as I said, right? But when I see what we are doing here locally, it is inspiring. We can move the needle locally on these issues. The partnerships with interfaith groups that I've been doing has been growing, in the energy in the room when I'm meeting with the houses of worship, which I should say is not just different denominations of Christianity. It includes some of the area mosques. It includes Baha'i and many other of the 600 houses of worship here in Montgomery County, that over 130 houses of worship signed on to our letter against hate when we were vandalized. And the energy that they're bringing into the room around the table to work collaboratively, to stand up for each other, whether it is after a pride flag is torn down or a Black Lives Matter sign is vandalized, or when our sign is vandalized, that we have made and are leaning into the commitment to stand with each other here, that hate has no place in our community. And we can move the needle here. We'll strengthen and expand our community partnerships with groups that we may not have had close partnerships with. That should immigration become an area of intense need, then we know about CASA, we know about these local organizations that we will create new relationships, new partnerships, but not because of the politics of it, but because we are based in morals and values and principles that are deeply Jewish. And how we bring Judaism out into the world, that's the work that we will do. I'll close with another section from the Sachs book. He writes, finally, there's a line in the Hebrew Bible that is almost never correctly translated. It refers to the first two human children, Cain and Abel. Each brings an offering to the Lord. God accepts that of Abel and rejects that of Cain. For what reason, we do not know. However, God senses that Cain is resentful towards his brother and warns him against harm to Abel. We then read, Cain said to his brother Abel, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. The text cannot be translated literally because it is syntactically ill-formed. It says that Cain said, but doesn't say what he said. The text fractured syntax focuses us on the most dramatic way to focus on the fractured relationship between Cain and his brother, and then spells out the consequences. Rabbi Sachs writes, when words fail, violence begins. Hence the three principles of civility, he says. Number one, for there to be justice, all sides must be heard. Number two, truth on earth cannot aspire to be truth as in heaven. All truth on earth represents a perspective, and there are multiple perspectives. And number three, the alternative to argument is violence. That is why the argument must continue and never cease. Those are the conclusions I have reached, he writes, since the long plane journey when I listened to three party leaders arguing together as they flew to attend the funeral of a brave politician assassinated by a zealot who did not believe in the democratic argument and believed instead that politics can be dictated by the barrel of a gun. He was traveling to Rabin's funeral. He concludes, I have argued that the loss of shared moral community means that we find it difficult to reason together. Truth gives way to power. Uncomfortable views are excluded from campuses. To win support, people start defining themselves as victims. Public shaming takes the place of judicial establishment of guilt. Civility, especially respect for people who oppose you, begins to die. The public conversation slowly gives way to a shouting match in which integrity counts for little and noise for much. This is not a culture whose survival can be taken for granted. It is one that is fraying at the seams. Now we must consider the question of morality itself. What does it have to tell us about the human person and the dignity and meaning of our lives? In the months and the years ahead, we cannot stray from our core values, expecting and holding accountable moral acts, and we know how to do that. As Jews, we have our core foundation based in a morality that is relevant to the world. And now it'll be our time to roll up our sleeves a little bit higher to do the work that we are called to do. Shabbat Shalom.